Our next speaker is the Director of Architecture School in University Technology Malaysia. She is actively involved in journal writing, book publications, and research supervision at postgraduate level in architectural history, theory, and culture, and the construction of national identity in the Malaysian context. She was actively researching in Malaysian architectural identity and 21st century teaching and learning in architectural education and sustainable community living. She has published many journals and books in Islamic and Malaysian architecture and won numerous awards for journal and book publication at the national level, as well as involved in many B40 community projects to encourage sustainable living environment among the society. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming Dr. Alice Sabrina.
Firstly, good day to all viewers and participants. Thank you for being here today. And before I begin, I would like to thank the Icon Best 2021 organizers, and especially to Prof. Pradipa, which is the head Department of Architecture, School of Architecture and Interior Design, who had invited me to become the keynote speaker for today's event. And it is an honor to be here with you today. And you are the elite, the top 10% of people in this industry. And only the very best people in any field will take the time and make the sacrifice to come so far for a conference like this. And I'm going to share with you some of the most important ideas that have ever been discovered in this area. And just imagine you live in a world where you are lost, confused, with no identity. Who are you? Who am I? And who are we? Imagine we live in a nation without national identity. Is it fine? Is it not fine? Does our built environment need a national identity? Does architecture need to have a national identity? So, in one sense, national identity got the authority not from the king, not from the government, not from God, but from the people. And Winston Churchill, in his common speech, said out loud that we shape our buildings, and afterwards, our building shapes us. And even Charles Correa, who is the famous Indian architect, stated that national identity is a process and not a found object. And being a process, identity cannot be prefabricated, and we develop our identity by tackling what we perceived to be our problems. Identity is not a self conscious thing. We find our identity by understanding ourselves and our environment. And the spaces we inhabit actually play a significant role in molding us as individuals, whether it be in the home or in workplace. But to what extent does this impact our collective national identities? And if you look at this picture, what is happening to our built environment? Where are we heading? And what kind of built environment that we are living in? Our architecture had significantly been influenced throughout the centuries by rapid economic development, urbanization, political and economic events, as well as the advancement in technology. Do we still live in a country that still maintains the national identity represented by distinctive traditions, culture, and language? Or have we been sacrificed to modernity, till losing the value of regionalism in which modernism had eroded the spirit of the region, or local identity that comprises of local characteristics and humanistic values? And if you can see in the 1920s, we still maintain our vernacular traditional architecture. In the 1930s, when the post-colonial or modernism starts to come in, and in 2020, suddenly, bam, everywhere in the whole world is the same with the same kind of architecture style. Whether you are in Germany, in China, in Switzerland, Italy, France, Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Japan, everything is in architecture in the frame of boxes. So before elucidating further on this topic, I would like to share with all of you a place of brief information about where I'm from. But before that, my name is Alice Ismail, and I'm actually the Director of Architecture in University Technology Malaysia, which is a research university and has been actively involved as a researcher, a writer in architecture history, theory, and philosophy, focusing on the area of architecture, geopolitics, and also national identity. And the topic of my keynote speaker today is the search for national identity in architecture towards nation building, modern regionalism as an approach. So this is UTM, and UTM is actually where I'm from. And UTM Architecture School is the oldest architecture school in Malaysia, and it was established since 1904 as a technical college. And currently, the school has a total population of 294 architecture students and 21 active staff, and the faculty is active in research. And we have 4 research centers covering from environmental to heritage and to cultural studies. So the content of my presentation today, I will cover 4 main areas. I will look into the definition and the characteristics of national identity, the issues and function of national identity in architecture, and the way forward, how we can apply modern regionalism as an approach, and we will look into the contribution of modern regionalism and the role in society. And once Roger Scruton had said, beauty is vanishing from our world because we live as though it does not matter. And in this sense, Sir Roger Scruton also mentioned that architects who once were the servants of the people who employed them, but we are not conscious as contributors to a public space or to a space that we develop or we build. So at the end of the day, we lost our identity in that sense. So what is actually national identity? If you can say from Anthony Smith, national identity is actually a collective identification that focuses on social and economic activity of the people. And in overall, it is actually is represented by a distinctive traditions, culture, and language. And once a political scientist named Rupert Emerson mentioned that definition of national identity is actually a body of people who feel that they are a nation. So, in overall, the concept of national identity and identity means the relationship or a sense of belonging and also attachment. So if we look at the focus at identity at the national level, it is defined as a sense of belonging, which means belonging to a nation or nationality. And identity at the national level involves symbols and signs that is practices by a country. So national identity, if you look deeper into it, it is actually a subjective kinds of a feeling that is shared by a group or a people towards a nation state, regardless of who you are, your status, and also your background. And the most important thing, if you look at the terminology of identity itself, it is defined by 3 important phases. Number one is from the individual perception. Number two, it is from the perspective of relationship which existed between an individual and the community. And at the third level is at the national phase for the global recognition. So whatever it is, national identity can be expressed as some sort like an association or affiliation to a nation because of one acceptance it is based upon tradition, culture, language, and also political ideology. And in one sense, national identity is often linked with our daily life, which include our language, our ethnicity, our history, parental lineage, social culture, and also others. So why does national identity is very important? Actually, there are 4 important things or 5 important things that bound why is it important. Number one, because to ensure the unification and integration. Number two, to cultivate the unity and integration between amongst the people. Number three, to showcase the country's success for gaining national and international recognition. Number four, to showcase either predominance or progress of a country. And number five, to rally for mass support and also well acceptance. So this will happen at the community and also at the government level. So according to Vail, there are actually four different types and categories of national identity. Number one is project identity, which is utilized for the benefit of individuals in communities, strata, organization. Number two, which is the subnational identity to symbolize the country's economic, political, and social achievements. Number three is the private identity, which is influential individual or patron of the society utilize economic buildings designed in the country to propagate their own taste and sense of national identity among the masses. And number four is for supranational identity, which is similar also to subnational identity. So, in one sense, how does national identity relate to architecture? Well, according to Jengs, according to Vail, and so forth, architecture building is actually is viewed as a tool that can symbolizes the development of a nation, and in this sense, it can capable of becoming a medium of expression at the international and at the national level. And according to Roland Barthes, who is a popular person in semiotics, he says mentioned that architecture to understand how architecture become a symbol it's at the three different level, at the denotation, at the connotation, and also at the myth level. And this is because architecture actually can represent meaning, and it is a symbol, and in this sense it contains a sign, it becomes a sign which is content and also as an expression kind of a form where a building is actually can represent a paradigmatic sense from the design motif of the building itself, and also from the syntagmatic kind of a sense from the elements within the building form in terms of scale, setting, access, spatial organization, and also facade. So in other hand also, architecture also can become a language. So in this sense, every form that is represented by the built form has meaning to it and associated meaning. For instance, every viewers, when they look at a building, they can have their own interpretation, whether in terms of the metaphoric kind of an expression, or in terms of direct or indirect or lateral, or in terms of a literal kind of an interpretation in the terms of meanings. So whatever the things that you look into, buildings will have a lot of different kind of expression and also a different kind form of content. And this interpretation is an action which is developed within or by and from the society itself. So how does and why does national identity relates to architecture? There are three main reasons why architecture becomes some sort like an object of interest, and it is often preferred as a medium to convey one's desire and meaning. Because number one, architecture is often seen as an effective symbol, and it is commonly being used throughout centuries as an object or sign to symbolize certain things, especially political ideologies of governments, of certain influential individuals, and so forth. And at the second part, architecture is interrelated with human life and our social activities, and because it had undergone through various processes which involve specific individuals' desires. And in this sense, architecture becomes an agent or a tool which can influence people's views and also emotions. And this has happened throughout the history, from the pharaoh who designed the pyramid up until the current context, by most influential leaders like Hitler when he asked Albert Speer to design the Reichstag for to popularize the Nazi regime, and also the King Louis XIV when he designed the Versailles Palace, and also up until now when you have the tallest building in the world like KLCC, and you have also Dubai Tower and so forth. And the third one, architecture indirectly exists because it is a self-contained system, because it can be read as a code to convey certain meanings, such as desire of the patrons to the building users. So, what are the factors that shape our national identity in architecture? And according to a lot of scholars, there are two important factors. Number one is the fixed factors, and number two is the dynamic factors. So, the fixed factors is actually evolved due to constant factors which relates to our existing geological setting, our landscape, our climate, and our existing culture, which is including the traditions. But from the dynamic factors, this is more influenced by the direction of the nation's character, which is according to the outlook of the architect and also the patron. And this can be seen through a lot of variables of the country's economic development, technology, material culture, the current society's belief system, the aesthetics trend, the architectural styles, and also the structural and also the material advancement. So, what are the issues concerning national identity in architecture? According to a lot of past scholars, they mention that the problems of establishing national architectural identity in all around all countries in the world is actually can be expressed in two main aspects. Number one is in terms of the search of the national identity itself, and number two is on the appearance of the national architectural identity. And there are a lot of factors that rises due to this because due to the absence of concrete guidelines, because some of countries still doesn't have appropriate guidelines to propagate or to promote or to produce or to show or to portray the idea of what is actually national identity in one country in terms of architecture. And also, there is a problem in terms of establishing national architectural identity itself among the local designers in our buildings. And from scholarly point of view, also, there is a problem because there is no certain theoretical framework, a proper framework that guide us how our architectural national identity should look in our own country. So I'm taking the case study of Malaysia. So as you can see, Malaysian had undergone a very pragmatic and also a very kind of fast-paced development. Since the late century to the 15th century, we are actually imbued by the traditional architectural style with this vernacular regionalism concept in which the architecture is more towards the regional influences, where it is according to the scale and proportion of the human, where it is designed according to the culture and according to our climate, which is the Malays, the Muslims who lives in Malaysia. But once when the British and the Dutch comes in the pre-colonial era in the early 16th and the early 19th century, they start to bringing in their ideology in their architectural style that they promote in their own country, which is from Portugal, where they bring in their neo Gothic, the Renaissance, the Palladian, the Tudor influence, and they try to marinate with the local architecture. And this gives a lot of different kind of a mix of architecture style in our country during the early 16th and the early 19th century. And after that, after the fall of the Dutch and the Portuguese, the colonial or the British starts to come in the 18th century up to the 1957. So in this sense of when the British comes in, they bring in the neoclassicism kind of architecture style where they start to marinate between the European classical with the local architecture. And as you can see, a lot of our old shop houses, our schools, our government buildings are all being influenced by the European classical and also by the Mughal and also the North Indian architecture style, because during that time British also subjugated India, and also they bring the influence of the dome architecture as part of our architecture in Malaysia. And also in the 1957, when we achieve our independence under Tunku Abdul Rahman, the architectural style starts to change from the British kind of an outlook with a lot of European classical. It becomes starts to become the era of modernism, because in Europe at that time, the 1950s and 1960s is the era of brutalists under the modernist architecture like Frank Lloyd Wright, Piers van der Rohe, and also Le Corbusier. So the international style, the concrete, the brutalist element of architecture also influenced the Malaysian architecture in our country. And in the second decade of independence, which is the 1970s and 1980s, after the fall of modernism, postmodernism starts to come into place in our Malaysian architecture. And this can be seen with a lot of expression, like the experimentation, like the Marker Graves architecture starts to come in, the Art Deco and things like that. But when the 1980s and 1990s comes in, it is a totally different shape of our architectural style and identity, which goes towards machinery regionalism or machine revivalism. And it goes towards the revivalism kind of an era where our architecture are not only being educated abroad, but they are also locally educated. So there is some sort like a marination between both parties, from the locally educated architects and also from the abroad educated architect, and they produce this kind of experimentation into architecture, where the idea of mixed match starts to come into place, the idea of foreign language like foreign revivalism, and bring forth how to marinate and bring back vernacular but in a modern kind of an expression. So when the fourth decade comes into place, the 1990s and the 2000, there's a certain tune of turning back the era in looking back into how to bring Malays and Islam comes into place into the Malaysian architecture. Because during this time, the political uh, the political issue, the political milieu in the country starts to change, because at this time the prime ministers more towards into propagating the Malays and Muslim, try to rally against them to get support from the society. So whatever the buildings that is being built during this era, it has this sense and taste of Malayanism into it, Islamism into it, because try to get support from the total populace in Malaysia, which is a high populace in terms of the Malays and the Muslims. But in the fifth decades, in the year 2000, the current 21st century, there is a bigger change also to our architecture style in Malaysia, where a lot of architects start to experiment deconstructivism, and everybody starts to change their mindset to become the next Zaha, the next Peter Eisenman, the next Bjarke Ingels. So in this sense, blobby texture starts to come into place, sustainable architecture, interactive architecture. So in Malaysia, we have a lot of different kind of architecture style starts to come into place from the 8th late century, 15th century, the traditional era, up until now, the 20th century. But we're still in the midst. Where are we heading? Where are we going? We are still in search for our actually national identity in our Malaysian architecture. So as you can see, there's a lot of written documentation written by scholars, and also some of the articles are also been argued by me also. So what is actually our Malaysian architecture going to look like? So if we look at the design by Hijaz Kasturi in the 1970s, there are some few buildings that showed an element of national identity, but being expressed in a metaphoric kind of a view, like the Tabung Haji building by Hijaz. It looks like a metaphoric expression by some people. It looks like a tabung, or where we said it in the Malay word tabung, or in the English term tabung means where you collect and where you save your money inside. Or in one sense, the bubu, we can say it is like a fish trap or a fish cage, usually used by fishermen, traditional fishermen to catch fish. So this is some sort like a metaphoric expression that he just trying to bring to the Malaysian architecture, try to combine culture and also modernity, but in a different way, in a metaphoric kind of a view. So another building that shows national identity without being too overt is the National Mosque, which is designed by Howard Ashley and also by Datuk Baharuddin in the in the 1960s, during our first early of independence era. And the National Mosque showed a lot of modernity to it by using concrete kind of materials, and also uses not using the really concept of the dome frame, but using this folded plate as an expression of a dome architecture to symbolize Islam in the country. And another one is the Twin Towers, which is designed by Caesar Pelli, which also uses the element of Islam in terms of the planning of the geometric patterns, but metaphorically try to combine Malay, Islam, and also our local culture, but in a modern way, using modern materials like steel, aluminium, glass, and so forth. But at the same time, also there is also unsuccessful attempts done by our architect trying to convey the national identity. And the most famous one is like the Putra Mosque in Putrajaya, who really trying to show the national identity, but instead it's not successful because it borrows everything, the image from the Persian kind of architecture, from the dome, from the horseshoe shaped arch, from the palatial setting of the mosque itself. And also, if we look at the PWTC Convention Hall, it also is some sort like a skewed kind of a design, which is a wrong philosophy interpreted by the architect, try to interpret the Malay traditional roof into a modern building, which is trying to show the concept of a vernacular revivalism, but the national identity become skewed and become overtly shown. And there is no some sort like a proportion or anthropometric kind of expression to it. And this also goes to Pradana Putra, which is also a newly designed building to show the seat of our Prime Minister in Putrajaya. So it doesn't symbolizes the idea of democracy and so forth. So as you can see, there is a successful and also unsuccessful attempts done by architects trying to search what is actually the Malaysian architectural identity. So why does national identity in architecture is very important? Because if you read a lot of scholars written by Vales, Kusnos, and things like that, they can say that it is vitally important to create an architecture that showcases the idea of national identity because it can fulfill the desires and the needs of each individual in a multiracial society, which means in other words you need to create an architecture with a national identity to represent the nature and also the life of the community, because if you miss wrong doing it, it will be wrongly interpreted, it will be overtly expressed, and will give a different meaning to the community and also to the society. So in the case of Malaysia, the issue and problem of national identity is very um, widely represented and shown, because you can see that our architecture is still lacking in terms of common understanding between individuals and building designs. We still have a lack of absence of to show equality on the government and also the people. And we also have showed a lot of loss in terms of our basic relationship with our surrounding context, with the climate, with the technology, with our cultural arts, and also the most important thing is our heritage and identity and also our cultural values. And the most important thing, the values that we lost when we really misuse our architecture, which does not symbolizes our national identity, which we lost the sense and symbol or the signs of to show to the world our political stature, which is our parliamentary democracy development in the country. So as a whole, it is of benefit for me as a researcher. I'm proposing that to showcase this national identity, it is best to have this kind of regionalism approach. Because as you can see, regionalism approach has a lot of understanding in terms of the use of local materials. You still respect the use of local style, composition, and expression. You still show the sense of application of organic theory and how to design in rationalistic manner in terms of form and space making. And the most important thing, understanding the architecture form as a democratic kind of a form and space making that is able to give birth to nationalistic identity that can fit for all the needs of the society and also the people in the country. So why does regionalism a suitable approach for promoting national architecture identity values? And as you can see on the screen, there are actually five important things. Number one, it can lead towards the formation of architecture, towards the idea of unities of society, and also to propagate the nationalistic sentiment among the multiracial society. And also it can give the unification value, which can strengthen the social relationship and increase the quality of life and also promote social interaction. And at one end, it can also fortify spiritual values and also social development among the society. So, in this sense, what is actually the definition, concept, and approach of regionalism? What does regionalism actually mean? According to a lot of scholars who are an expert in regionalism, they mention that the term regionalism means actually is an awareness or loyalty towards a region. So regionalism approach in architecture is not only for at the global level, but also at the local level. So in this sense, you need to nurture regionalism because to develop a country and a nation. So in this sense, it brings back the spirit of a region or local identity, which spur the sense of ownership, the sense of belonging. And regionalism approach can produce an architecture design with a national identity that showcases the spirit of the era. And in this sense, it can show respects to the local politics, to the economy, to the social culture, to the climate, to the topography, and also utilizes the latest technology. So according to scholars like Rasdi, Mursib, and I also had done a research on regionalism, And also few famous regionalists, critical regionalists, originalists, others regionalists who written about originalism. They said that there are three types of regionalists in architecture. Number one is vernacular regionalism. Number two is modern regionalism. And number three is postmodern regionalism. So in vernacular regionalism, there are two important aspects, as you can see here, which is duplicating or you are interpreting in a new kind of a form or in a traditional kind of a form. And in terms of modern regionalism, it more focuses on the transformation of the region itself that looks into the two approach of organic and also in terms of machine kind of an approach that has a lot of influence by modernist architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, and also Le Corbusier. And also from the critical side, which is the postmodernist regionalism approach, is from the critical regionalism we give an emphasis on placemaking, form making, genius loci, defamiliarization, architectonic sense, and also a lot of aspects relating to visual, experiential, and phenomenological experiences. But to my key put lecture today, I would like to express on more towards on the modern regionalism itself. So, what are the factors that shape modern regionalism? As you can see from Le Corbusier, he gives the experimentation of machine kind of an approach that looks into tectonic kind of a form of structural construction methods. And Frank Lloyd Wright also brought this organic kind of approach with emphasis on culture, which includes the ideology, the custom, the social behavior, and also give an emphasis on the context, on the landscape, on the topography, and also on the climate. So as you can see down here, there are two important things that shape the modern regionalism that can be used as an approach to showcase national identity in architecture in one's country in terms of the context and in terms of the tectonic. And the tectonic comprises of the structures and the materials, and also from the context, it comprises of the climate, the topography, and also the culture. So, what are the characteristics in detail and also its determinants relating to this matter? In terms of tectonic, it relates to the technological capabilities and construction concepts. It also involves the ergonomic evaluation as a guide on how to produce design in terms of form making and space making, so that the design of the form making and space making can show and guarantees the psychological comfort and health of its users, and also in terms of tectonic that emphasize on the terms of functionality, which is based on the scientific and logical valuation as the basis on how to design the architectural forms. And also in terms of culture, it looks back into the organic aspects of the local context, which is the culture of the inhabitants or the existing cultures of the users, and also look into the contextual part, which looks at the existing landscape, the topographic conditions, and also all relating to the heritage requirements and also the heritage values. So there are a few case studies who had done this in a lot of different parts of the world. And for example, this is a public buildings designed by Tadao Ando, which is the Azuma House. As you can see, it is very modern in look, very sleek, very classic. But at the same time, this architecture design bring back the integrating of the Japanese culture and tradition as well as nature into the building design. And in part of certain part of Tadao Ando, when he designed this Azuma House, he brought in these ideas of uses of natural materials to create serene environment and also bring in the traditional culture of shoji walls in the Japanese traditional homes and implement it and combine it with the modern architecture to showcase a modern kind of living known as the Azuma House. And the second case study is designed by Alva Aalto, which is the San Salo Community Center in Finland. So this design, as you can see, is dictated by the requirement and the environment of the community itself. So the building is very low in scale, it is very proportionate, and it brings a lot of using the natural kind of materials into the architecture design, which showcases a lot usage of red brick, and this dark red brick is actually highlighting the local industries who produce this red brick within this community and within this region. So in this sense, they're building this kind of a building gives an impact to the users. So they did not feel intimidated. They feel as the building is part of the society, is part of the community. And the building also is not even monumental in scale. So in this sense, it showcases a lot of national identity values in terms of the how Alva Aalto conserved this idea of regionalism element into his building design. And the third case study is also a building by Tadao Anto, and this is the Fabrica Benetton Research Center. And Tadao Ando really experiences when he designed this building. He brings back the combine the culture with the industry, but at the same time offers a young kind, a modern kind of an environment for the young people who are the main users of this building to showcase between the tradition and also between the modernity. And as you can see in this picture itself, it is actually there is a 17th century villa, which is also integrated as part of the Fabrica Benetton Research Center. So Tadao Ando actually successfully bring in the regionalism and modernism element and come up with a kind of national identity that showcases that this building is for all to use and without any what you can say specifically to any race or to any ethnic or to any to a certain culture. And the fourth case study also is a building designed by Mario Botta. And this is the City Library of Dortmund, which is located in Germany. And as you can see, that this building actually characterizes a very kind of a modern complex of a building. And it can be accepted by all. And the architecture showcases a lot of experimentation of uses of glass and steel and that is embedded into a part of the building. So it is being accepted in terms of bringing back the memory of the great past, which is the city itself, and also at the same time try to showcase this idea of modernity into the building design. Okay. And the fifth case study is Sabarthi Ashram Museum, which is designed by Charles Correa. And as you can see that this building is very modern in look, but it still maintains this element of regionalism, the pitch roof because of the Indian climate, the tropical climate, using the tile roof, the brick walls, the stone floors, and the wooden doors. And what really interested on this building is that it is very, very proportionate to scale which respect the existing landscape and also the existing surrounding. So at one end, when users feel when they enter the building, they feel they are a part of the building. So as you can see that they can bring in their identity also embedded as part of the building, even though the building showcases modern materials and modern technologies. And the most important thing is that this building showcases the expression of the spirit of Swadeshi, which is an important thing in the Indian culture. So, what are the benefits of having modern regionalism approach to showcase national identity architecture? Because number one, it can produce a design that have an openness values, easily accessfully. It can be placed the building at a strategic location, can be environmental friendly with economic features that is suitable for all. Can have these natural features that harmonious with the site and celebrate the needs of the user senses that respond to the user's requirement and very organic in form. And the most important thing is that it respects the cultural features, the local environment identity, and is fully functional to the needs of the users. So, in this sense, when you have this kind of an approach, it can develop an architecture with a national identity that it can improve the quality of the user's life in such a way to the environment and to the social impacts of the building design can be minimized. So, in conclusion, as you can see, why do we need to have a national architecture identity that respects to the approach of modern regionalism? So there are actually two important things that we need to look into. Number one is that national identity should respect to the fixed and the dynamic factors. And also it is the role of the building patron, the role of the designers, and the role of the involved authorities that they should have an objective voice. When they design something, you should design that respects the need of the living spaces and for the convenience of the community. And this all can happen if you look back into the approach of modern regionalism that can showcase the national identity in architecture. Because national identity architecture is about architecture for the people. And this is also important because the visible presence of the public buildings can also shed the lights and the characteristics of the society because it is the seed of the dynamic to showcase the country's politics and also the creation how the identity of the state can be discerned. So overall, you can say that buildings actually is a symbol of culture because it can suggest many social and political interpretations of the conditions of the society, whether internally or whether externally. So it is up to us as a designer to determine how our architecture should look like. As H.A. Ghani once defined, who is the famous Indian scholar, he mentioned that national identity is a process through which a feeling of unity, harmony develops in the hearts of the people, and also it is a sense of common citizenship or feeling of loyalty to the nation and is fostered among them. And Frank Lloyd Wright, who is the master builder, once said, an architect is like a prophet. If he cannot think at least 10 years ahead, do not call him an architect. And it is up to us as architects, as designers, as builders, to be responsible in shaping our built environment to become what we want to become. So our architecture can be shared by all nations, by all race, and by all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alice Sabrina Ismail, for your insightful presentation. I am sure that the audience have found it to be a very informative presentation. Now we shall take a short break for our sponsor video, post which we shall proceed to our next speaker.
Ergonomic articulated keyboard station for long working hours. Work Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives. Slide in, slide out, rotate or lock, easy access of CPU below the desk. Work Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives. Third generation concealed drawer slides for your furniture. EBCO, simplifying lives. EBCO sleek telescopic drawer slides for quality furniture, much more than most. EBCO, simplifying lives. EBCO new generation concealed hinge for quality furniture, much more than most. EBCO, simplifying lives. Ergonomic doorknob lock for your bedroom and bathroom doors. EBCO, simplifying lives. Add design aesthetics to your furniture with aluminium profiles and handles. Live Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives. Space utilization at its best. Wall bed fitting for compact multifunctional rooms. Live Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives. Now, easy access to your bed storage with ProLift electric bed fitting. Live Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives. Floor-to-ceiling walk-in wardrobe sliding system. Design it with glass and wooden panels as per your choice. Live Smart by EBCO, simplifying lives.